as we prepare to receive Rev Charlie's message, if you know this one, let's sing it together. It is Dan and Lima's song, Go Inside to Find My God. Here we go. I will leave this world as it is, go inside to find my God. Would you sing that with me? I will leave this world as it is, go inside to find my God. Let's do that again. I will leave this world as it is, go inside to find my God. I will leave this world as it is, go inside to find my God. For inside there is peace, inside there is joy, inside there is more than enough. Inside there is peace, inside there is joy, inside there is sacred love. I will leave this day, I will leave this day as it is, go inside to find my God. Let's do that together. I will leave this day as it is, go inside to find my God. Inside there is peace, inside there is peace, joy, inside there is joy, more than enough. Inside there is more than enough. Peace, joy, sacred love. Inside there is peace, joy. Inside there is joy. Inside there is sacred love. I will leave this life as it is. I will leave this life as it is. I'll go inside to find my God. I will leave this life. I will leave this life as it is. I'll go inside to find my God. I'll go inside to find my God. Yes, I'll go inside to find my God. And now, Rev Curtis.
I am amused by the people around here who continually ordain me. I never have been ordained. Licensed, but not ordained. Well, good morning. The three men were obviously strangers. The patriarch of the tribe had never seen them before. They'd simply appeared out of nowhere. He looked up and there they were. He had no idea who they were or where they came from, but that wasn't important to him. He jumped up, ran to them with open arms and said, "Welcome to my encampment." And that wasn't all. He sent one of his servants for some water to slake their thirst and to wash their feet. And he directed his wife to take some flour and make some cakes. He took a choice calf from his herd, had it slaughtered and prepared, and then he fed his guests. Now, I don't know about you, but I find that surprising. What about you? Suppose some strangers you'd never seen just showed up at your front door. Would you prepare a feast for them, no questions asked? My faculty of imagination can come up with all kinds of reasons why I shouldn't let them in. At best, I'd probably guess they wanted to give me a copy of the latest Watchtower. I'd likely thank them for caring. Tell him I'm not interested, and close the door. Abraham, however, didn't give it a thought. He just greeted the strangers as long-lost relatives and took them right in. And nobody in Abraham's camp would have been surprised. In Abraham's society, such behavior was law. The reason could best be explained by Tevye and the musical fiddler on the roof. One was obligated to provide hospitality even for strangers. It was tradition. Tradition. Now, it's a good thing Abraham welcomed those strangers. He didn't know it at the time, but those strangers were divine beings. You know, angels. In fact, one of the three was God in the flesh, masquerading as a human being. What if Abraham had turned God away? Oy vey. Have you ever wondered why encounters like that don't happen anymore? As a child listening to Bible stories, I asked my parents, why doesn't God appear to us as he did to the people in the Bible? But other than asking the question, I didn't think much about it. And then God tricked me into unity. And I learned that God has appeared to me sometimes in human form. I just didn't know it. Can you think of any encounters you've had in which God expressed as one of your friends, a family member, or even a stranger? Now that I think about it, I realize that I've had a lot of those God moments. I didn't always welcome those encounters, so I've got some forgiveness work to do. It's me I've got to forgive. But even Abraham failed to recognize God, and knowing that helps me feel better about myself. It turns out that God and his divine companions were not random travelers looking for directions and a place to spend the night. They were actually looking for Abraham, and they found him on their very first try. It was a bit of a stretch to imagine an omniscient God getting lost. God had a couple of messages for Abraham. I'll skip the first message. It relates to another story for another time. The second message had to do with Sin City. You know, before there was Las Vegas, there was Sodom. And you know what they say about Sodom? What happens in Sodom stays in Sodom. And that's not quite true, because God knows. Did I mention that God is omniscient? And it might be of concern to a few of you that God knows what happens in Las Vegas, too. God's message to Abraham was that God was about to destroy not only Sodom, but the neighboring city of Gomorrah as well. He was going to rain fire and brimstone on them, destroying those cities, killing all their inhabitants and destroying the fertility of the land around them. God could do that. Let's not forget that this was God's second act of genocide. And I'd like to make a disclaimer at this point. I keep referring to God as a male. Unity's taught me that God has no gender. And I've also been taught that God is love and that God could not possibly practice genocide. However, I'm speaking about the God described by Genesis, and the God of Genesis was perceived as male and did practice genocide. He'd done it before. Remember the story of Noah? Well, Abraham didn't take God's threat to Sodom very well. And that was probably because Lot, his nephew, the son of his brother, lived in Sodom. So Abraham decided to challenge God on the issue of justice. He got face to face with God. Now, I've wanted to challenge God on the issue of justice more than once, but alas, I'm not living in the time of Genesis. Loosely translated into modern English, this is what Abraham said to God. Wait a minute. Are you saying that you're going to punish the innocent people along with those who are guilty? That's not fair. That's not justice. What if there are 50 good people in Sodom? Why should they suffer the same fate as the wicked? Well, even the God of Genesis was a reasonable God. He realized the logic of Abraham's argument. He agreed to spare Sodom if 50 good people could be found. And Abraham wasn't even sure about that. He began to bargain with God. Step by step, he argued God all the way down to 10 righteous individuals. This yet clashes with my understanding of my relationship with God. In Unity, we define our conversations with God as prayer. We don't bargain with God because we believe God never changes. Therefore, we do not believe in intercessory prayer. We teach affirmative prayer. Our purpose in praying is to affirm thoughts that align our consciousness with God's will. Well, Abraham's bargain with God became a moot point anyway. God couldn't find 10 righteous people in Sodom, and he carried out his threat of fire and brimstone and razed Sodom and Gomorrah to the ground. That place is barren to this very day. Now, because Sodom had already disappeared by the time Genesis was written, it makes sense to ask if this catastrophic event actually occurred. And as we've learned to not take the Bible literally, how do we know? What inspired the account related in Genesis? Well, Genesis locates Sodom in the valley of Sodom, which tells us it was adjacent to the Dead Sea. Nowadays, that land is infertile. But archaeological evidence suggests that it was very fertile land in the time of Abraham and Lot. And geological study tells us that the region was devastated by an earthquake around 1000 BCE. Now, Genesis mentions the existence of bitumen in the area, most likely highly flammable tar pits around Sodom. This bitumen exists in the region to this day. So it's easy to imagine the fire and brimstone that accompanied the destruction of the city. Now, it's not likely that the writers of Genesis fabricated a fictitious event. There was a place like Sodom, and it was destroyed. Only the reasons for its destruction are controversial. And there is more than one point of view. So let's take a look at the events leading up to the fall of Sodom. God and his two cohorts already accepted the hospitality of Abraham. Now they moved on to Sodom, perhaps to test its hospitality. And wouldn't you know, the very first person they encountered was Lot. Lot just happened to be sitting by the city gate. And you have to know this was not coincidence. Is there anyone here who's not heard of divine order? Lot came from the same tradition as his uncle Abe. So he invited the three strangers into his home. He provided water to wash their feet, prepared a feast, and baked unleavened bread. This, of course, was usual behavior for nomadic people like Abraham. As I said, it was tradition. However, it was not tradition for city dwellers. It was certainly not the way for Sodom. Lot's customs were very different from those of Sodom. He would never be accepted as one of them. In fact, the men of Sodom were so disturbed that Lot had welcomed strangers into his home, they didn't welcome newcomers, and they were definitely against immigration. If they'd had the resources, they would have built a wall. During that night, a mob gathered at Lot's door. The mob demanded that Lot send his guests out to them. They said, "Bring them out to us so that we may get to know them." Sounds friendly, doesn't it? As you can guess, the mob was not interested in getting better acquainted. In Genesis, the verb to know means something I am not prepared to discuss with you this morning. You know what I'm saying? But Lot knew what they meant, and he was horrified. Tradition obligated him to protect his guests. He said to the mob, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Look, I have 2 daughters who've not known a man. Let me bring them out to you, and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they've come under the protection of my roof. Tradition. Is there anybody here besides me who's shocked by this Bible passage? Lot was loyal to the customs of his tribe, but I can't say much about his loyalty to family. What man would offer his daughters to the mob? And the interesting thing is that the writers of Genesis were not bothered at all by what Lot did. It was not an issue. The issue was Lot's protecting his guests. So what's the lesson? Why did Sodom have to be destroyed? What was its sin? Well, that depends on whom you ask. The fundamentalist Christian view was stated by the televangelist pastor John Hagee. One of his followers asked whether God would hold the United States accountable if it ever legalized gay marriage. Reverend Hagee answered that Sodom and Gomorrah was God's pilot study for his response to the homosexual society. But Bible scholarship has caused that view to weaken, except among the most conservative Christians. The conservatives tend to take the Bible literally. Yet, if we do take the Genesis literally, there is no reference to homosexuality as the cause of Sodom's destruction. The writers of Genesis overwhelmingly emphasize the law requiring hospitality. According to the Jewish Encyclopedia, most Jews view the sin of Sodom as failure to show hospitality. And this view is reinforced by the Talmud. The Talmud's a compilation of ancient teachings considered sacred by the Jews. To a degree, it's a commentary on the Torah, including the book of Genesis. The Talmud includes a commentary on the sin of Sodom. It says that if a poor man came to Sodom, no one gave him bread. Every townsman, however, gave him a dinar. He was required to write his name on the dinar. Excuse me. I lost the page. Thank you. Yeah, every townsman wrote his name on the dinar, but the local merchants refused to accept dinars with names written on them. So the poor man starved. When the poor man died, everyone took back his dinar. The Talmud also mentions a young woman who gave bread to a poor man. When the townsmen found out what she'd done, they daubed her with honey and tied her to a parapet on the wall. The bees came and consumed her. Maimonides wrote a commentary on Genesis in the 13th century. He said that the intentions of the Sodomites was to keep people from coming among them. They feared that many people would try to immigrate there because their land was so good. Where have I heard that one before? And the Old Testament itself clarifies the sin of Sodom. Chapter 16 in the book of Ezekiel says, "The guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. They were haughty and did abominable things before me. Therefore, I removed them when I saw it." Now, this account of the fall of Sodom gives us some further insight on the Genesis description of perception of God. This is the fourth mention that the pastoral life is more acceptable to God than the settled life. The first was the story of Cain and Abel. Remember that Abel's sacrifice of a lamb was more acceptable to God than Cain's sacrifice of agricultural produce. Later, we saw Noah curse the settled lifestyle of Canaan. Then, God destroyed the Tower of Babel because he saw it encouraging the gathering of people into one place. Now, we see the city dwellers of Sodom failing to measure up to the ways of Abraham the nomad. Even Lot's hospitality paled compared to that of Abraham. Do we believe in a God who favors rural dwellers over city dwellers? I'm betting not. What do you think? We tend to think of Lot as the hero of the story. After all, he was the righteous individual whom God saved. Was Lot the good guy as we want to believe? He appears to have been passive-aggressive. He hesitated when confronted by the mob. The three divine visitors saved his bacon by pulling him inside, locking the door, and temporarily blinding the mob so they were no longer a threat. When the visitors told Lot of their plan to destroy Sodom, he was skeptical. They had to take him by the hand along with his wife and daughters and drag him out of the city. Now, left behind were Lot's two sons-in-law who thought the threat was a joke. We're surprised to discover that Lot's daughters were married. These were the daughters Lot claimed had never known a man. The writers of Genesis were happy to overlook Lot's little bit of dishonesty. In Genesis, it wasn't important. But these things are not what most of us remember about the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. We remember that God destroyed those cities with fire and brimstone, but most of all, we likely remember that God warned Lot and his family not to look back at the destruction. We also remember that Lot's wife could not resist the temptation. She looked back and was turned into a pillar of salt. And she's still there to this very day. She's not alone. There are salt formations called tufas in that region. They were there when Genesis was written and no doubt provided the inspiration for the story. But this is a lesson we remember. If we wish to move forward on our spiritual journeys, we must stay in the now moment. In other words, if we look back, focused on our past mistakes, we could get stuck right where we are. Unity's co-founder Charles Filmer would have me believe that the Bible is my story, the story of my progress from innocence and ignorance to a more sophisticated spiritual understanding. In other words, my spiritual journey. And you guessed it, your spiritual journey. Now, fortunately, Mr. Fillmore has passed down to us a way to discern the more spiritual meanings of the Bible. We refer to it as metaphysics. Loosely translated, metaphysics means science of being. It requires us to read between the lines. Now, it's largely theoretical. So each of us gets to determine whether or not the formulas work for us. So we break the story down into its metaphysical elements, which are often influenced by the Hebrew meanings of the names. Each element represents a characteristic or tendency that is either innate or active within your consciousness and in mine. We all have them. The first element in the story is Sodom. Now, I ask you to raise your hand if this does not apply to you. Do we ever think things or desire things we don't want anybody else to know about? Do we have habits we'd rather not reveal? If you didn't raise your hand, you've got Sodom tendencies within you. If you did raise your hand, are you sure about that? I noticed nobody did. Sodom's sister city was Gomorrah. Have you ever clung to ideas that have inhibited your spiritual growth? I sure have, and I'm guessing you have. If you didn't, you wouldn't be seeking a more spiritual path. So both those wicked cities are the planar elements of our consciousness. And if we want to make progress, we have to be willing to go through a purification to eliminate Sodom and Gomorrah elements from our consciousness. It's not easy because we all have the element of Lot within us. Lot represents our tendency to focus on our negative thoughts and feelings. And we have to overcome that before we can be saved from destruction. Fire in this story is a symbol of the destruction of evil and error. It represents the process of cleansing and purification of our consciousness, bringing us to a more positive state of mind. We are on our way to something better, some of us anyway. Those of us who are not burdened by the element of Lot's wife. She looked back at the ruins of Sodom and was turned into a pillar of salt. Do you experience this element? Do you ever think back to an old comfort zone that you're struggling to release? Do you ever wish you could revisit that comfort zone? Now, I don't know about you, but I've sometimes tried very hard to hang on to some of my sense thoughts and secret habits. And that's Lot's wife having her way with me. Now, salt is a preservative. It corresponds to our memories. When we wish to return to the good old days, we must be careful what we pray for. There are reasons why we left them behind. Now, I don't think any of us wants to be a pillar of salt stuck in the past. Now I have to make one more disclaimer. I've just said a lot of things that might be considered sexist. Lot's wife, for example, has taken a big hit. Well, let's face it. The writers of Genesis were sexist throughout. Metaphysics, with its masculine and feminine elements, is by its very nature also sexist. I vehemently deny that these things reflect my attitudes. I love you all. Now, these words were inspired by Mayor Baba and sung by Bobby McFerrin, and I quote, "There's a little song I wrote. You might want to sing it note for note. In every life we have some trouble. When you worry, you make it double. Don't worry, be happy. Don't worry, be happy now." And finally, the mantra inspired by Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Be excellent to each other.
Thank you so much. And for someone who's also been ordained occasionally, Rev Curtis, thank you so much for your message. I really appreciated what you said about the tendency to turn back, to drag all the comfortable ruts, the mistakes we've made in our spiritual journey. We are challenged to leave. What happens in Sodom stays in Sodom. So here's my offering. I don't need to carry the past with me. I don't have to take the thoughts that dragged me through the muck. I don't have to subscribe to reliving each mess that I made for the rest of my days. I don't need to pack the shame. I don't need the thoughts that blame. I live for the holy name. I'm cleansed, healed, and fired up by the holy flame. What happened there stays there. What happened then was then. This isn't who I am anymore. I won't let how I thought shackle me to the floor. That was then, and this is now. By pure grace and sweat of brow, I'm called to be the truth of me right now. So what happened there stays. I don't need the thoughts that blame. I live for the holy name. I'm cleansed, healed, and fired up by the holy name.
was then. This isn't who I am anymore. I won't let how I thought shackle me to the floor. That was then, and this is now. By pure grace and sweat of brow, I'm called to be the truth of me somehow. So what happened there stays there. How I thought there stays there. And who I was there stays right there.
Deidrey, if I had known you were going to sing that song, I wouldn't have had to give the talk. As we prepare for our time in silent meditation, I quote to you from the book of Ecclesiastes. A time to seek and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to throw away. I invite you to quiet your minds and to get comfortable in your chairs and to center your attention on your heart space. And remember the advice of Scripture. There is a time to lose and a time to throw away. By letting go of what no longer serves me, I make room for new good to appear. Release opens the way for God's infinite supply. And now I invite you to allow these words to speak on your behalf. Letting go need not be painful. I am free to keep useful artistic or sentimental items and to release whatever has fulfilled its purpose. I open myself to new ideas. I am able to gain new insights. I focus on solutions rather than noticing what is not working. I set realistic goals that encourage success. Releasing the past is the first step toward creating the perfect future. And I invite you to ponder that truth in the silence. As we return our attention to this time and to this place, I call upon the words of a recent daily word, which says it as it needs to be said. My life experiences have provided me with many gifts. From joyous to painful, I have taken something from each one: a nugget of wisdom, understanding, solace, that has helped me evolve into the person I am today. I am always growing, always changing. With gratitude, I receive the blessings while letting the painful memories go. I have no room for regret and do not dwell on things I cannot change. I release unwanted thoughts and unpleasant memories. I free myself to enjoy new experiences and create beautiful, lasting memories. With an uncluttered mind and an unburdened heart, I embrace the present moment and eagerly create my bright and beautiful future. And so it is. Amen.
I let go, I allow, I accept, and I trust. In the light, I am whole, I am one. I let go, I allow, I accept, and I trust. In the